Good evening, everyone, and welcome to True Scary Stories. Tonight's story is called The Ouija Board. One of my best friends died in a car accident when we were 16 years old. Our group of friends was tight-knit, so it had a devastating effect on all of us. In each instance we got together, we reminisced about the times back when our group was whole. One evening, a couple of years after the accident, one member of our group had the idea of trying to contact the friend who had passed away using a Ouija board. I thought the idea was preposterous. My family didn't raise me to be religious or even spiritual. However, a few friends in the group were religious and believed in the afterlife. So that night at my house, we held an impromptu seance and tried to converse with our old friend. 4 of us sat on the floor around the coffee table in our rec room. We placed the board in the center of the table and each placed our fingers on the planchette. One of the guys invoked the name of our dead friend and asked him to communicate with us. We waited for a couple of minutes, but nothing happened. The other 2 guys each took turns inviting our friend to communicate with us, with the same result. It was now my turn. I felt silly at this point and held back my laughter as I asked if any spirits were willing to talk to us. The planchette jerked over to yes. "Real funny," I said, and pulled the planchette back to the center of the board. The other 3 guys swore they didn't move it. I got the sense that everyone believed someone else was responsible. Again, I asked if any spirits were present who wanted to speak with us. We sat still for almost a minute with nothing happening. However, just as I was about to exclaim to everyone how stupid the entire situation was, I felt a slight vibration in the planchette. It then slid, inch by inch, back to yes. We all took our hands off it. I demanded to know who was moving it. The other 3 guys again swore it wasn't them. They then began interrogating me. Before we continued, we each took turns swearing on our dead friend it wasn't us who was moving the planchette. This was a big deal, mind you. None of us took something like that lightly. I have to admit that I was getting a little creeped out, thinking a spirit was actually moving the planchette. We replaced our fingers and began asking the spirit a series of questions. However, the planchette never moved again. One of my friends proposed that we were indeed responsible for its initial movement because of our subconscious will. I thought it was a reasonable explanation and suggested we put the board away and watch a movie. The movie ended around midnight, at which time my friends left my house. I was cleaning up the place when I noticed they forgot to take the Ouija board with them. My curiosity getting the better of me, I took it out and placed it back on the coffee table. Taking a seat on the ground, I placed my fingertips on the planchette and asked if the spirit was still there. I immediately felt a small tremor in the planchette before it slid to yes. Now I knew I wasn't trying to play a trick on myself, so I was definitely freaking out at this point. However, I did my best to remain calm and asked the spirit if it would answer some more questions this time. The planchette slid away from yes, but then moved right back to it. I asked if the spirit was that of our friend. The planchette moved from yes to no. I was a bit disappointed, but honestly I already knew it wasn't him. I followed up by asking the spirit who it was. The planchette moved away from no, then slid right back to it. I then asked the spirit how he or she died. The planchette first moved to the letter G before sliding over to the letter S. I figured these letters were the initials of words and attempted to figure out what they were. The best I could come up with was that they either stood for a name or the words gunshot. I moved on to another question. I asked if the spirit was good or evil. The planchette slowly inched its way towards both letters as they sit near each other. A dark feeling came over me as I expected it to land on the E. However, I literally let out a sigh of relief when the planchette ended up pointing to the letter G. There is a fruit cellar just off the rec room. I heard what sounded like movement coming from the small room. I would be lying if I said I popped off the ground and courageously opened the door to check it out. Instead, it took me a minute to work up the nerve to investigate what was making the noise. I finally opened the door, stepped in, and took hold of the string used to turn on the cellar's light. When I pulled the string, the light didn't come on. The bulb was burnt out. My nerve evaporated, so I stepped out of the cellar and closed the door. Even though I was no longer at the Ouija board, I looked up to the ceiling and asked the spirit if it was making the noise. I turned around to walk back to the coffee table, but stopped dead in my tracks. The planchette was moving all by itself, from the letter G to the word yes. I tore upstairs, shutting the basement door behind me. Everyone else in the house was asleep by that point. Normally I would have gone up to my bedroom, but didn't feel safe doing so at that point. Instead, I went and sat in the brightly lit kitchen and snacked on some cold pizza, though I wasn't the least bit hungry. After a few minutes, as I chewed on a bite, I noticed a dark discoloration on the floor at the kitchen's entrance. The discoloration seemed to begin moving into the room. It slid along the floor in front of the cabinets before making its way up their side. I realized the discoloration was a shadow and it was making its way towards me. Although I wanted to run from the kitchen, I froze. The shadow continued to move along the cabinets before continuing along the wall. It ended up stopping directly behind where I was seated. My imagination began running wild, creating several horrible scenarios that could play out. The shadow, however, continued to stay put on the wall behind me. I stood up from the chair and backed out of the kitchen, never once taking my eyes off the shadow. Making sure I had turned on the hallway light first, I turned off the kitchen light, thereby killing off the shadow, or so I hope. However, a noise similar to that in the fruit cellar started coming from the kitchen pantry. I turned around and headed back for the kitchen. Reluctantly, I flicked the kitchen's light switch. The shadow, of course, was gone. However, the noise in the pantry was growing louder. I held my breath and opened the door. The noise stopped on a dime. It was at that moment I felt a cold come over me, as if the temperature dropped 10 or 20 degrees. The air around me also began to feel moist, as if I was standing in a fog. I looked around the room but saw nothing. I then looked down at my feet. To my shock, the shadow was on the floor beneath me. I ran from the kitchen and upstairs to wake my parents. I told them that I thought there was something in the house. Soon, the entire family was awake, combing every room for anything out of the ordinary. We found nothing. There wasn't an intruder, a shadow, or even a mouse. Several times since that night, I have heard noises coming from the fruit cellar, kitchen pantry, and my bedroom closet. There have also been a few times I swore I saw a shadow out of the corner of my eye. I chalk these instances up to my imagination playing tricks on me most of the time. In some cases, I think it's the spirit I contacted with the Ouija board that night. Although I'm not religious, I have taken to praying it's the former explanation and not the latter.